I'd like you to explain what are the main democratic systems and economic systems, and how we distinguish between a democratic system and an economic system. And after that, we can explain these different systems in more detail so we can fully understand them and clearly distinguish between them.
That sounds great. I think that's the crucial question. So to begin, we need to make a very important point, important distinctions that people often mix up. That is the difference between a democratic system and an economic system. And it's pretty simple. When you think of a democratic system or political system in general, answers are they answer a simple question: who holds the power and how are decisions made? It's as simple as that. If we think about economic system, that answers another questions, similar in parallel, say how does a society produce and distribute wealth? There are two different dimensions, which means that the country can be democratic or not, while also having different types of economic organization. So on the side of democratic and political system, we can identify a few broad models. First, there is, as we have here in Canada, Western Europe, we can, dispute the case, that's still the case in the US, is a liberal democracy, which means with free elections and protected rights. There are also authoritarian regimes where power is concentrated and elections are limited or absent. But more generally, we're kind of sometimes we're in between the two. Some speak of hybrid or illiberal regimes. Now, we talk about illiberal regimes. Now, the main reference was Orban in Hungary. Is that more and more the case in the US? Well, we can turn to that a little later if you want, which means that there are elections, but institutions are more fragile. On the side of economic system, there are also few broad models. The most widespread today is what we call the market economy, often called capitalism. Sometimes, we use both terms. It's not exactly the same thing, but very often we use both terms, which means that private firms and markets play a central role. At the other extreme, there's the planned economy, which is historically associated with communism, where the state largely organizes production. So between the two, we find mixed economy. The market dominates, but the state intervenes to regulate the economy, provide social programs. This is the case for most developed countries, including Canada. What is important to understand here is that political systems and economic systems are not necessarily the same thing. A democracy can have more or less state intervention in the economy, like, for instance, more interventions in Canada. Sometimes we refer to Canada as a welfare state than nowadays in the United States. But at the same time, an authoritarian regime can also have a very capitalist economy. And here we can think about, especially in terms of its opening to the rest of the world, we can think about China. China, sometimes I tell my listeners or my students, seems like, Chinese are more capitalist than Americans themselves. So that's why to understand a country, we always need to look at the two dimensions separately. The political system on one side, the economic system on the other. So I think a few clarifications from the get-go, I think were necessary here.
But that's interesting because you mentioned, and I really feel in the public discourse that people tend to basically put those in a bundle. Like if there was only one kind of configuration, but what you're telling us is basically you have the political system is one thing, the economical system is another thing. You can have different combination of both,
Yeah.
and to really understand a country, you need to basically analyze on both axes.
Yeah. Which at first, bright brush, it's not necessarily so far from reality. but we all gain by getting a little bit more, deeper into those differences.